Welcome to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, an IFS-informed trauma recovery coach. This show features interviews from guests all around the world as they share their impactful stories and deliver hope and inspiration through their personal post-traumatic growth. We explore and discuss resources and coping strategies to support the survivor community to thrive in their own healing journeys. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah. Today we have with us Suzanne Anderson. Suzanne is the founder of the Mysterial Woman. She is a psychologist, author, coach, leadership consultant, and transformational teacher. Her pioneering work in guiding women to awaken their full feminine and masculine strengths combines insights and practices from ancient wisdom, depth psychology, and modern neuroscience. She's dedicated the past 30 years to decoding an embodied, integral, and accelerated archetype pathway to unlock the next level of our innate potential. She facilitates global online programs, workshops, and retreats. She's the co-author of the triple award-winning book, The Way of the Mysterial Woman, Upgrading How You Live, Love, and Lead. She's originally from Canada and now is nestled into Seattle, Washington. And her new book, You Make Your Path by Walking, a transformational field guide through trauma and loss, which looks like this. Thank you for my copy. I want to just read a little quick. We're going to kind of dig into the book. So I just want to kind of read, it's the book's bio. When her beloved husband took his life, and with it, her life as she knew it, Suzanne faced a choice. Would she be broken down and defeated, or broken open and transformed? Part memoir, part guidebook, this book accompanies readers on their own journeys through the barren landscapes of trauma and grief. It offers comfort, guidance, and inspiration to making meaning out of loss. It's structured into 3 parts. Part 1 sets the stage, walks us through the shocking events of her husband's suicide and the dismantling of her own life. Part 2, which we'll dive into, explores how to embody each of the 8 critical capacities of resilience. And part 3 provides some of the inner tools, rituals, and broader perspectives needed when you are struggling with loss and grief. So this book is going to be released on June 13th of this year, published by She Writes Press. The book is currently available for pre-sales on Amazon. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate having you. Let's jump right in. So obviously this is a sudden trauma. This is a really profound grief that you have had to walk through. What's been the most difficult part of this healing journey for you?
Yeah, we're diving right in here. Good.
Diving right in. Yeah, take us right to the depths. Let's go to it.
You know, I think the thing that comes to me to say in the moment would be there was the disconnect between where I thought I was heading in my life and what actually happened. So the challenge to be with what was, what actually had happened. And it's something, just to put it in perspective, as your listeners won't know, my work, I'd been working for years in the space of transformational change and helping women, kind of midwifing women into this next level of what I would call the evolutionary unfolding of our potential. And the first book was completed, the manuscript was done, we were ready to find a publisher, ready to go out and sort of, head out into the world and share our research. We'd been doing research for 10 years in our university programs. And then my husband took his life on January the 3rd, 2013. And the disconnect from where I was moving in my, what I took, what I was intending, and the reality of what happened at that time was something. So probably of all in the journey, there have been so many things, and we'll talk about some of them, I'm sure, that were enormously challenging. But I think that adjustment to, it's something I teach in my work around what it is to be present and with what is. And this just wasn't something that would happen to me. This was something, I worked with other women who were working through things, but this wasn't something that would happen to me. That identity, my identity was shattered and so then adjusting to, well, who am I now? Who am I? This is happening to me. So I'm going to start there as probably the most challenging thing.
You talk a lot about transformation. I know that's kind of been your life's work, right? And using trauma, loss, grief transformationally rather than just as a devastation is kind of how you phrase it. I know, and you know, that we all have the capacity to rebuild, right? What would you say to people who maybe aren't quite ready to do something transformational with their loss and trauma yet?
Well, I think I would reframe that a little bit. I would say, um, and that's why the title of the book is You Make Your Path by Walking. It isn't actually that you have to make something of it. You know, in a way, it is how do you move through what has happened to you or is happening to you in a way that allows you to contact more of your true nature, that allows you to, so you don't do it, and I didn't do it as a thinking, this is going to be transformative for me. And I didn't go through it like that. I actually, interestingly for me, one of the myths that I use that's in the first book is the Persephone Demeter myth. Do you know that Greek myth?
No.
It's and the beauty of a myth is that it kind of charts an archetypal pathway or a mythic pathway. And if it endures over time, it's got something, the bones of it have some meaning. Well, this is a myth of a Greek maiden who's out picking flowers with her mother, Demeter, the goddess Demeter. And she's Hades, who's the god of the underworld. You've probably heard of him.
Yes.
He'd made an alignment with Zeus and had agreed with Zeus that she would be a good bride for him. So one day he comes up out of the underworld in his chariot and takes her away. And she goes into the underworld and is grabbed by this event, we could say, and is in the underworld. And it's a beautiful myth. In the first book, I use it, one could read it if they want. But what happens initially when she's taken down is she resists. I won't be here. I don't want to be in the dark. I won't talk to you. I won't eat anything that you have to give to me. And Hades, who loves her, is trying to convince her, well, listen, you're here, you might as well enjoy it. And well, eventually, in the myth way it unfolds, Zeus sends Hermes to get her and bring her back, because the world is suffering. In the Demeter is the goddess of the grain. Her mother isn't letting the earth produce, be fertile. And so just as she's about to return, Hades says, well, since you're leaving anyway, why don't you eat some of these pomegranate seeds? Might as well have something to eat. And maybe you've heard of that part of the myth. Anyway, she eats a few pomegranate seeds and is returned to the upper world. And her mother says, well, you didn't eat anything when you were down there, did you? And she says, oh, well, I did eat those 3 seeds. And which meant, in the way that the world was arranged at that time, that she would have to spend a certain number of months every year in the underworld. Now she was bonded to the underworld and a certain number of months in the upper world. Okay, so ultimately she becomes queen of the upper world and queen of the underworld. This is the point of the story, that she didn't necessarily want what happened to her to happen. It was a grab from life, as certainly my situation was. And however, it was and then she resisted it, which, that's my work, has been to help women not resist what's actually happening right now or happening in their lives. And I knew this. I mean, I knew that this was true, that the more that I could accept, I've been grabbed into this darker place, and how I go through this will really matter. And one of my good friends, Michael Mead, you may know of his writing, came over. He actually lived on the same island as I did, and he said, and I was describing, just sharing with him what had happened and where I am, and he said, well, you're Queen Persephone, let's remember, and you're going to be taken into the darker and deeper, the depths, let's say, of the underworld, but you do know how to travel there. And so let go and go. And I recall something happened in that moment where I just realized this is the path I'm going to be on now. It is, and the one thing I know, I don't know if I'll get through it, and I really didn't. Like, I wasn't thinking, just where your question started, like I'm going to do this in some transformational way. I was just thinking, I am going to walk in the way of the Mysterial Woman, which I'd spent years understanding. And if I came through the fire, then I would know, the truth, the deeper truth of what I had been teaching, let's just say.
What would be the difference, like some like real life kind of ideas of moving with grief instead of moving against it?
Right. Well, moving against any feelings, because there was also anger in my situation. There's also a lot of fear. And the way that I understand and work with the emotional body is that it is like a wave front, as I'm sure feelings rise up and they rise and they go down and they move. It's sort of like an ocean, heart like the ocean. I mean, that's actually how it's meant to go. But when grief, when the waves would come, so for me, first of all, I was just in a lot of shock, obviously, initially. The contrast, as I said, between where I was heading and what I knew of my husband and what happened was just so staggering that there was that was beyond something I could take fully in. So initially, I couldn't even. I would say my emotional body was just frozen in terror. I mean, that would probably be true. When the waves of grief started to move, they would rise really unpredictably, as I'm sure you know. And when they would go, I taught myself, and I knew this already, again, through the work that I do in my programs and so on. But this was like surfing at another level, because it was something to do with surfing. It was, the wave would move, the terror would come up. If I really go with this feeling, if I let myself really just release my grief in a strong way, I will never return. That was the mind thought, right? But I know that's not true. I had that sense of, I'm Queen Persephone. I do know the underworld, and I'm going to be okay. Let myself go. Now, often I did that with, I knew kind of when the wave was bigger than I could handle on my own. And that's where I think one of the key elements in moving through situations like I went through is having a really resonant field around you of loved ones. And so, when there was a big wave, I rarely went through those on my own. I'd want someone to hold me or to be with me, not to try to talk me out of it, and not to, try to give me positive affirmations of the future or anything. It was just like, trust me that I'm going to be able to surf. I'm going to be able to be in this, but be here with me while I go through it.
In part 2 of the book, you have designed these 8, you call them meta capacities: generative mutuality, unfolding the emergent, influencing system resonance, embracing paradox, multidimensional knowing, tending the field, energy stewardship, and authentic presence. So I speak a lot on returning to your authenticity, right? That whatever trauma tried to steal from you, returning back to that authenticity. So I just wanted to read just a quick excerpt of this authentic presence.
Okay.
It says, the shattering of the ego during the dark times can be an opening to something much larger if we let it occur and allow our true nature to shine through in an authentic presence. It is in this authentic presence that it actually creates room for others to be themselves. When we set ourselves free, we set others free as well. Can you just talk to us a little bit more about what this meta capacity of authentic presence means?
Yes, I will. First of all, I want to say these meta capacities, in the research that we had done for 10 years with women in our university programs, we'd been tracking how to basically help women midwife the next level of potentiality. We would say this consciousness maybe, and capacity to be a match for the complexity of these times.
Yeah.
And in the very last chapter of the book, we'd identified these 8 metacapacities. We had seen them, but it was like seeing, that's a new terrain out there in the world. And we hadn't fully embodied it, any of us. We are embodying it, women are right now, let's say, women and men, in terms of these capacities being a match for the times. So I ended up, fully living each of these capacities that I kind of understood intellectually, let's say. So I want to just say that for the start. So the way I think of authentic presence then is not, it isn't that in trauma you go back to some authentic self. It is that actually it's a movement forward. And that there's a way that I view these capacities, metacapacities, as this equips us to be in the world the way it is today. And that one of the things that can happen, and happened for me in the midst of the dissolution of everything in my life that really, held me, or where my identity was, where I hung my identity, in a very short period of time, was it broke me open more to, well, I uncovered, or I revealed, or I had an intimate contact with parts of myself I had never had before. Right. That's the invitation. Now that's hard to, because one of the things I think, and this is what I hope the book points toward, is that when you're going through something as brutal as I did, which was, by the way, not just the loss of my husband, but the loss of, he with his suicide, he took all our financial world. He took, my home, my community, basically everything was just erased within 6 months. That sort of, had me feeling, oh, this is my life. It was all gone. And I found, in a way, a reducing in a healthy way down to, like, who am I then? Because understandably, a lot of our identity is tied to all of these ways we are in the world. And all of those ways were taken away. I mean, I had took me a while to come back to the book. I paused programs I was running. I didn't have my teacher identity. I wasn't in a way, even the heroic identity of all the work I'd done, helping many others through trauma and difficulties, that was gone. So then who am I? So that's the invitation. And maybe I can just tell one story that's from that chapter. Yeah, which was, I'd been invited to be a keynote speaker at an event called Emerging Women, which was still a sort of programmatic keynotes and so on that they do across the country. Yeah. And that was here in Seattle. And when I was asked to do it, I thought very naively, I'll be through this. It was going to be, I think I was asked, maybe in March, and this was an August event. Yeah. And I thought, well, I'll be, for heaven's sakes, I'm going to be back on my feet again in some solid way. And, no sense, never could have imagined that it would even take 10 years for my book to come out. I just couldn't have imagined all that. You don't know what you don't know, right? Right. Anyway, so I said yes. Well, it came time, close to the speaking event, and there were 300 women, and it was a big deal here in Seattle. And there were other speakers that I think Daniel Laporte came just after me, and there was some great music presentation before. And I had a talk prepared to speak basically to all the research I'd done. And right before the talk, I just put my notes under my chair, and I said to myself, I can't do that talk. I'm going to do this other. I don't know what exactly I'm going to do, but I know that wouldn't be authentic. It's like I would be going back to some self that I'm not now. So I walked up on the stage, and I actually walked over to one side of the stage, and I stood there in the spotlight and said, okay, this is where I thought I was going to give a talk from, and all my years of research and women in leadership and women in emergence, and all these new ways of being that are a match for these times and so on. And then I walked over to this other side, which was a little bit less lit of the stage. And I stood there right on the edge of the stage. And I said, but here, this is the place in which I'm actually going to speak. And this is the, in a way, all of that I can tell you about, these great new capacities that are coming online, ways that we can be as women in the world today. I can stand here in this place, in the vulnerability of this place, and say this authenticity is what I want to share. And then I went on to speak about things. Well, you could hear a pin drop in the room. It was so profound for me to feel that I was welcome, like this me, not the academic, not the one who knew a lot of things, but just the vulnerable me who, with some ways of being through, this difficult passage, and the invitation to women to walk into the vulnerable waters. And this sort of, Sarah, to say, this brings us back to, for your listeners that are going through trauma at the moment, the biggest thing I could say is, don't, it's not about going through this like a gift. In fact, I still can't say that. And I find it very challenging when people sometimes want to reframe this. Well, this is you're going to be so much better. And all of these things are going to be for the best. It's like, if someone talks to you like that, I just say, okay, thank you very much. That is not where I resonate. But, that's
same.
It's more that you can say, if you're going through something, you can say, this, I am here for this, not for the life that's going to happen after I get through this, but I am here for this, because you will never have this moment back. You'll never have this time back again. And then and that's where the authentic self, I think, gets forged, in the fire of being so present in the moment with what is.
Because now you've designed a resource for trauma survivors going forward, but you didn't have this book. So what were some of the things that were most helpful in your personal journey?
Yeah. I'm going to go right to in fact, I thought of it this morning. I still do this. So how you start your day is critical. Now, I do a lot of work in my programs and personally with how you build a personal container. What is that container you have for you from which you can, be in relationship with the world and all the things that will come into your day. So I already knew about that. But when this trauma happened, the first thing I would do, and I still do, is I would turn around, sit on the edge of the bed, put my feet on the ground, and say a little prayer of gratitude. I am so grateful for being embodied here with this day. May this day and the way that I live in it be a blessing. And I didn't believe it half the time. I wasn't grateful. It was a practice to just bring myself, because especially when you come out of the unconscious, out of the sleep state, that is a very rough world initially when you've gone through trauma. And so your conscious mind is starting to gather, and you just want to direct your conscious mind in a certain way.
I love that.
So that is really, really important. And that would be one thing I'd say. The other, I'll just give you a couple here, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please.
I work with the idea of creating altars, what I would call like outside spaces that you can connect to your inner world. Do you know that word? Do you work with that kind of a world of?
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff like that. That's actually was going to be my next last question, was going to be more about like the rituals and the altar things that you've done. Those are so important, either reading poems or mirror work or that kind of thing. Altars are great. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's that we're all getting all questions into one here then, because the idea of having an outer space. So when women go through the deep transformative change programs that I run, it's you're working in the unconscious, and that's the territory you want to be working in, because that's where the deep change happens, when you make conscious something that's unconscious.
Yeah.
But it's really helpful when you're doing that to have an outer, visible place, or that represents what you're moving toward when you're doing that work. Carl Jung, who is, as you probably know, the one who kind of brought us into the understanding of the unconscious, when he was doing all that deep work, he created something called the Bollingen Tower. He actually built a stone tower with stones externally, so that he had this something that he could return to when he was in this dream state, and kind of understanding the unconscious. So that is something I really recommend you. And it's not a religious thing. I would say what I did, I already was working with an altar, but for someone going through trauma, you just find a little spot somewhere in your house that represents the sacred to you, and what might be possible. So it has a candle. It may have photos of people that are your support, or it could have a photo of a religious or spiritual, the Buddha or Jesus or Mother Mary or Kuan Yin, or energies that you might work with. Or it might have an element of nature. Maybe nature is something where you find a sense of well-being, and so it becomes a place that you just go, okay, this. And I kept that. I put fresh flowers on it in a little vase, so I would always have to tune that up.
Yeah.
And that would be that was always like, if my flowers were dying, I knew, okay, you're losing a little sense of your hope that you're going to get through this, or your vision of it's all going to be all right.
Yeah.
So the altar was another one, and I'll maybe just give you one more.
Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say, and I guess I started with some of this, but a resonant field. And what I mean by that is, that is not everybody necessarily who's around you, because you are going to, there's a descent involved in trauma. And rightly, because your conscious world, which you could think of as the upper world, has been disrupted. And there's then this descent going into the dark. That isn't easy to do, and it's not easy to do on one's own. And it is necessary. It's necessary. Otherwise, you're just going to paper over whatever that wound is, and it will come back later. You'll have to deal with it. So having a group of friends, it might be, in my case, it was my community. I had many women that I had taught for years. They came around me. My very close women friends, I had someone with me every week. They took turns, so they'd be in my home with me. I had my family members who lived all over the world. One of them would come they took places and changed roles so that they could all come and be with me. And there were practical things that they could do for me, but even more than that, it was this resonant, loving field that I could rest into. It's like my body could resonate with. And so if you're with a lot of toxicity around you, and some people are, then find the resonant fields. That could be a support group that you go to for a trauma survivor, or a suicide support group, if you're in a suicide situation, or get yourself into some resonant fields. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell us just briefly, what does that feel like when you're with that resonant, the group of people, or the field of energy, or the family, whoever it becomes for people? What would that feel like in somatically?
What a great question. And there's wonderful neuroscience on this now, which, as you probably know, probably why you're asking the question.
Yeah.
I
love neuroscience.
Yeah. This is the beauty that we know now, that when clients come here in my office, or in person, and also on Zoom, it doesn't have to be in person.
Sure.
We know now, but we start vibrating. Our little cells of our little bodies start vibrating with the other person. And so, like a tuning fork, you could say, like a tuning fork, and then you hit one tuning fork and you've got other tuning forks sitting around it, they will all start resonating.
Yeah.
That's actually what is happening, the physics of it. And so in your body, it is, I would say, I don't have to hold as much. When I'm in a resonant love field, it's not that I'm thinking I don't have to hold as much. It's that I'm resonating with them, and their resonant energy, let's say, the tone of that tuning fork is more harmonious. Mine is very disturbed, of course. And if I'm in a disturbed field, I mean, for a long time, I couldn't be. I chose not to be in chaos spaces with a lot of noise or loud music, or my nervous system simply couldn't handle it. And that is correct. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people that they'll be urged too soon, oh, get out there now, we go back into the world and you're going to feel better once you do. And it's true, you do need to make your way back. And you'll titrate that, though. And I titrated that, to let that come out of my own little resonant fields and then start to take on being in environments where that was not the case. Because ultimately, obviously, we want to be back in the world, and we can't control all the settings that we're in. But when you're first going through the trauma, you want that feeling in your body of, it's a sort of safety, is the best way I can say it. Gives you permission to go through the waves you need to go through. You just feel held.
I think that sounds like a great place to wrap up. Suzanne, thank you for being with us today. Your book is going to be coming out. You Make Your Path by Walking, a transformational field guide through trauma and loss, in June of this year. It's available now, pre-sales on Amazon. I'm going to have that linked up in the show notes. Tell us where people can find you if they want to reach out or check out more about you.
Yeah. My website is mysterialwoman.com, MYSTERIAL woman.com. And you'll find out a lot more about me there and the programs that I do. This is the work I do with women. And you'll find a book page there for this book, this new book, both books, and some photos that kind of connect to the story, which I think people will find interesting to be able to see if they're reading the book. And yeah, I would say I'm going to be designing some programs that will launch in the fall.
Awesome.
That will be my larger programs are in motion. We just launched one 2 weeks ago, so that's happening for women, the Emergence program. But I'm going to do some shorter programs. So get on the mailing list, and if you resonate with me and with the work that we're doing, and if you're a woman, or you identify with the female gender, then get on the mailing list, and be really happy to have you walking along with us.
That's awesome. Will the programs, will they be online?
Yeah, they are all, actually, they were online after the first book came out, because in 2016, I was in Europe doing a tour with the first book, and people wanted to do our work. So we were online, fortunately, way before Zoom actually took off with the COVID.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh,
so they're mostly online. Our long 15-month program, which is the Deep Change program, that is all online because it's global. And then we meet in person for a final retreat. Yeah.
Oh, that's really special. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Suzanne. I really appreciate you joining us today on our podcast. You have a great rest of your afternoon.
You too.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening or watching this episode of Trauma Survivorhood. For more info, show notes, and links, check out the episode guide below. Until next time, be well, survivors.